Last time, we were trying to put the verse in St. John's Gospel, chapter 6, verse 63, which is commonly used by many anti-sacramental believers to dispute the notion that the bread and wine of the cup of the Eucharist are indeed the real body and blood of Christ. We were looking at the chapter in its context, which is really in the context of the feeding of the 5,000, and involves a lengthy discussion between Jesus and the people who have come to seek him, seeking after fleshly sustenance, genuine, real, earthly, body-sustaining bread. And Jesus attempts to raise their minds beyond and above their temporal concerns, their concerns about just feeding the body, to help them begin to understand their spiritual need, and to understand that he is the spiritual food who comes down from God, who comes from heaven, comes into the world to bring true life to humankind. Last time we left off around verse 41 of the chapter, where we heard the people complaining to Christ because he tells them that he is the bread which comes down from heaven. As I pointed out as we were finishing last time, their initial complaint, though, is not about Jesus referring to himself as bread. They are first concerned about this notion that he came down from heaven. And they began to whisper among themselves, as we said last time, "Is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he says, 'I have come down from heaven'?" This was just to point out that apparently their minds are so locked and settled into this desire for temporal food that Jesus' curious reference to himself as bread initially takes the second seat to his claim that he is from heaven. So Jesus reinforces the truth then that he is more than the son of Joseph. Beginning in verse 43, we read, "Do not murmur among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught by God. Therefore, everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life." It's verses 43 through 47. "Believe I am from the Father in heaven. Believe that I am the giver of everlasting life," the Christ exhorts them. By these words, he seeks to shake the people out of their preoccupation with temporal earthly concerns. Then he begins to direct them as to how they may partake of that everlasting life. He says, "I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world." That's verses 48 through 51. When Jesus identifies the bread from heaven as his flesh, the crowd becomes agitated. As verse 52 tells us, "The Jews therefore quarreled among themselves, saying, 'How can this man give us his flesh to eat?'" These words utterly stupefy those gathered there. But let us recognize that the reason they caused them such consternation is that these Jews are still thinking about everyday sit-down-at-the-table food. So how is the Christ going to serve himself up to them like he distributed the loaves and fishes the day before? And his flesh? No Jew would consent to cannibalism. So the crowd is dumbfounded. But Jesus doesn't answer their question. He just takes the whole business deeper, further challenging their already taxed minds. He says, "Most assuredly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers ate the manna and are dead. He who eats this bread will live forever. Those are verses 53 through 58.